Welcome to this episode of Forgiving the Girl Inside, a Matter of the Heart. I'm your hostess, Lisa Drennan, and this is May of 2022. For those of you listening in the future, we are doing a podcast blast, sharing the secret where courageous women post-abortion, miscarriage, or loss of a child are coming on and sharing their healing journey stories. What we reveal heals. And when we can share our story, it helps others to know you are not alone. You may seem like you're alone and that there's no one there to support you, but there's a whole slew of women who've experienced what you've experienced. So I encourage you to reach out. Today, we have the beautiful Charise Brunner sharing her story of miscarriage. She was a guest a few days ago. So check out her interview a few days ago where she shared her story about abortion. Her mom was going to abort her, and that was a very powerful story. It's a new perspective that we haven't shared on here. So definitely check that out. But today, if you know anyone who's experienced miscarriage that needs to hear this story, please be sure to share it with them. So welcome, Charise, again. Thank you so much for your willingness to be here and share your very own personal story about miscarriage and all of that. So you had talked about in the prior show how you'd met your husband, you fell in love, and you were trying to have babies and things weren't going well. Tell us what was going on. You know, you got married. Did you plan on having a big family right away? And what was going on with that?
Hello. Yes, thank you so much for having me back on the show. And yeah, when my husband and I met, he mentioned more than a few times that I was very motherly, and I knew that he was looking for a wife to have children with. And in my early 20s, we met when I was 21 years old, and it was maybe right before then, right around then, I started having a lot of problems with my female cycle and my periods and just all of the things health-wise. And I've gone on now to learn that I have polycystic ovarian syndrome and cysts on my ovaries, and that kind of explains, some of the irregular periods and stuff I was having back then at that time. But yeah, when we got married, I had already been told by a doctor that I might not ever have children. And so we were both just very career minded. We were both working in the mortgage industry by the time we got married. But a lot of the conversations that we had, while we were dating and getting to know one another and deciding to get married was around like, what is our family going to look like? And I was like, I might not ever have kids, and so we discussed the possibility of adopting, one day. And we were both just happy to be newlyweds and focused on career. I was climbing the ladder in my corporate career in the mortgage industry, and I kept getting sick, and I had been to the primary care doctor, like I can't say the word, is it gastroenterologist?
Gastroenterologist, yeah.
Like the stomach doctor. We had done ultrasounds and CAT scans, and I think I was getting scheduled for even a colonoscopy, as like a 24-year-old, and wow, just trying to figure out what was happening. But yeah, so shortly after my 25th birthday, I switched industries. I got kind of sick of the mortgage industry because I didn't feel like things were moving as fast as I thought they should. And so I got a similar job down the street. Instead of doing workflow coordinating and closing funding for mortgage, I went to do closing funding for a place that did all of Colorado's car loans. And they worked with all of Colorado's credit unions. And so still very fast-paced environment. And my boss told me that I had 30 days. That was my probationary period. I had 30 days to learn how to fund 40 contracts a day without mistake. And when he said no mistakes, he meant no mistakes. And since I had come from the mortgage industry, I started funding 40 contracts a day without mistake within 10 days. And so after 10 days, he was like, oh, good to go. And he just gave me more responsibilities, and I signed up for working overtime. Like I wanted to work as much as possible because I was not family minded. I did not think I could have children, and I was all about, career, and wanted to pay a big down payment on a house and get, that going. And so anyway, into my new job and getting sick, went to the doctor. Not one doctor thought to give me a pregnancy test or ask, do you think you could be pregnant, just because no one thought we could, and gave me a bottle of Zofran for anti-nausea. I was like eating them, still getting sick. And then one day my husband's looking at me and he's like, I think you're pregnant. And yeah, it was a miracle. We had our first daughter, and the OBGYN had said, oh, after you have this baby, your period will regulate, because I had only had like one period the whole year before we got pregnant with our oldest. And that's not normal. I had regular periods as a teenager. I could even predict like what time of the day I might start. And then, my periods just kind of dried up. And so we had my first daughter, and then everyone kept saying, well, you're going to be really, really fertile, the first year after you give birth. And I was like, yes. And so my husband and I decided to start trying to conceive after our oldest turned 6 months old. But my periods went back to being irregular. They dried up. Trying to conceive was not happening, and so that was a big deal. And then, something I shared on the previous podcast about my healing forgiveness story, it was like when I forgave my mom for what she told me that I was going to be aborted, God miraculously healed my period. Like 3 days later, I got my period, and I've had a regular period since, except for this time 2 years ago, I was having too many periods. So now that I'm almost 40 years old, I'm still working on like hormonal things, but back in my 20s and, having children and things. And so, we were trying to get pregnant as soon as we could, and it just wasn't happening. Went down that summer when my oldest daughter was 1.5, like 17 months old, spent the summer with my parents, got my period back, came right back home, started trying to get pregnant right away. And, August went by, September went by, October, November, December, and we weren't getting pregnant. And then by January, and by this time, my oldest daughter had turned 2 years old, because her birthday's also in January. And we were in the car driving to my husband's parents' church, which is a long drive away. And it's January, it's winter here in Montana. And I experienced something that I did not experience growing up in Colorado. It's called freezing rain. And so there's snow everywhere, and it's torrential raining. And we hit, it's like a puddle of black ice. It's the only way I can describe it. It's like black ice with water on top of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know why it didn't melt, but it was extremely slippery, and we hit it, and our car spun like around this way. We hit a snowbank, and then we spun again, and then we flipped over.
Scary.
And so my husband was driving, I was in the passenger seat, and our 2-year-old is in the back seat. And I remembered hitting my head and just kind of blacking out. I don't know, it wasn't like a long blackout, but I do remember wondering what happened. And I looked over to see my husband, and the car roof was down, and I had to look past it to see my husband. And so we had damaged the top of the car enough for it to sink down. And we had, thankfully, when we flipped over, we landed right side up, but we landed in a giant thing of snow. When I came out of the car, the snow was up past my knee, and I'm very tall, I'm 5'7". And that was very hard and traumatic. Our 2-year-old in the back seat, you could just hear her tiny voice saying, I'm okay, and thankfully, my husband just had a few little cuts from the glass, because the whole windshield was shattered, the roof was messed up, the whole car was completely totaled. And thankfully, some other people drove past us eventually. We didn't have cell phone signals where we live here in Montana, northwestern Montana. There's not a lot of people and cell phone signals. So thankfully, another person drove by, and they recognized my husband's last name. They're like, oh, I grew up with your brother. And so they called for help for us, and an ambulance came, went to the hospital here in Whitefish, and I was in a neck brace. So I had sprained my neck and sprained my ankle. But before we did any tests, I kept telling the hospital staff, I was like, we've been trying to get pregnant. I might be pregnant. We're trying to get pregnant. They had me do a pregnancy test, and it was negative. Okay. So after that, we went ahead and did all of the x-rays. They gave me some muscle relaxers and things, and I had scheduled some follow-ups at the regular doctor, later on that week. And that was it. And then I had this feeling, though. It was like, I know we've been trying to get pregnant. I really, really, really wanted to be pregnant. And then about 10 days after the car accident, I did a pregnancy test, and I was pregnant. Wow. So my mind shifted, though, from the trauma of the accident to, I'm pregnant. I'm excited. I'm going to grow this baby. We're going to have a family. Yes, this hard thing happened. It was a big financial hit to our family too, losing a car like that. And, but we're moving forward. And then I had about a week of happiness being pregnant. And then I started miscarrying. And it was a very long, drawn out miscarriage. And, I was going to the doctor, and I was still healing from the car accident with my sprained neck and my sprained ankle, and trying to work around my husband's schedule, because we went from 2 vehicles to 1, and trying to drive my husband back and forth to work and get to the doctor. So I was going into the doctors quite often, and we would check the baby, we do an ultrasound, and they're like, well, the baby's in there and there's a heartbeat, but we don't know why you're bleeding, and couldn't stop bleeding. And yeah, and so it was just very traumatic until one day, mid-February, went in for a checkup for the ultrasound, and the tech was like, well, not only is there no heartbeat, just the baby's not in there. So I had been bleeding, and the baby had come out at some point, maybe the day before that. But it was just devastating. And like I said, so long and drawn out. And then having conversations with my doctor, he would say, well, I think that we should just be patient, let your body do its thing. Your body's clearly trying to heal. You just went through all this car accident. Like, you have a lot of healing to do. I don't want to do a DNC, because I was in denial, because I still felt pregnant. But what was happening was the baby had come out, but not the sac that eventually forms the placenta, Mm-hmm. And so at the time of miscarrying, I was probably 8 or 9 weeks gestation, and so it was very sad. And then I don't think I quit bleeding fully until first week of March. It was like March 10th or something, so it was very long, drawn out miscarriage and very traumatic. And I was devastated. I was so devastated. And, it brought a new dynamic to my marriage, like my husband and I.
Yeah,
it was just
that's a lot of suffering. So did they end up doing a DNC, or did you end up passing the SAC?
Yep, I ended up passing the SAC. They did not do a DNC. I did not want a DNC. I wanted just to believe that I was still pregnant, but I wasn't. But the SAC passed on its own beginning of March, and then the bleeding trickled off. But yeah, it's because the SAC was still there. That was what was causing me to bleed so much, and sometimes I wonder if those were the right decisions, because I ended up becoming really, really anemic, and that's something that I struggle with already.
Yeah.
So I'm not a medical professional, but just like advice, like just ask your medical team to test your iron, because that would have greatly helped me heal faster, I think.
When I was pregnant back in the 80s, in 1986, 85, 86, they tested iron. I mean, we had iron tests every time I went for my yearly. We had an iron test, and it was probably in the late 90s. They stopped doing that, and I was like, why are you stopped doing that? And I guess they only do it if there's a history or what have you. But I've asked to have my iron checked And they have to have a special reason to do it. And I just thought that was silly that insurance companies won't pay for that. It's like, why wouldn't you want to know, especially if you're carrying a child, you want to have that strong source of iron. But yeah, the medical field has changed so much when it comes to that. So when you were in the hospital after the car accident and they did the pregnancy test, now they automatically do pregnancy test regardless. I was in the hospital in September of 21 for diverticulitis, and they did a
Mhm.
pregnancy test. I had a full hysterectomy in January of 21. I'm like, I am not paying for a pregnancy test. There's no way I'm pregnant. I have no female organs. And I'm like, they're like, it's standard. We have to do a pregnancy test on every single woman, regardless of age. I'm like, what? That is bizarre. But I wonder if that's the reason why, is because they missed. Because I imagine, so do you think that the pregnancy test they gave you in the hospital was a false negative?
No, I think it was just so early on. It was
Maybe
just
it
so
was.
early on. I probably didn't have the pregnancy hormone built up enough and it was a urine sample. Maybe if they had done a blood test,
Well,
it
that's,
would have
yeah.
shown up. But yeah. So it was quite like 10 days later when I did the pregnancy test here at home, I was like, aha, I knew it. But
Yeah.
yeah, so the miscarriage was very devastating. Like I said in the previous episode, my mom took my miscarriage harder than I did, even though I took it pretty hard.
Yeah.
And I had already imagined, like it's going to be another daughter. Her name's going to be Victoria. She's going to be victorious in the Lord. God is going to use this baby, for his glory in the world. And to lose the baby was just so devastating. And I think that was the first time in my life I realized that my husband and I are very, very different, because I was the one going through it and he was trying to support me as much as possible. But thankfully, the hospital up here was able to set me up with a local support group for life after loss and grief, and just grieving. But it was just a
That's
few.
beautiful that you have that program, because I know, I mean, I've never searched it, and maybe the audience has, but I know a lot of women who've had miscarriages who don't have that support. And people, some of some of the guests have shared like, oh yeah, people have told me, well, you can have another one, like it's no big deal, like, oh, that child wasn't meant to be. You can just try again. You're young enough. And I was like, what? That,
Yeah,
like, well, we're not looking for advice. We're looking for empathy, and like we just need to share the feeling, because it is a loss. And to be able not to be in a safe place to share that loss and to be stifled. So it's amazing that you had that program and your husband was very supportive. So that was amazing. um,
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I was able to just open up to the life after loss group in a lot of ways that I wasn't really able to with my husband, you know.
mhm.
And there were some other things that were just hard during that time. Like my due date that year would have been October 3rd,
Mhm.
2012 or 2011. I'm sorry, because later on I did have another baby in 2012, almost a year to the date of the car accident. We had our car accident January 16th, 2011, and I ended up having another baby January 21st, 2012. And people did kind of say those things to me, like, you can get pregnant again and you can have another one, but to lose one. And I even remembered having a conversation with the Lord after I lost one. He was like, well, just get your body prepared, to have a baby. And I was like, but I would have had a baby, and my best friend here, like my due date was October 2nd. And she was also pregnant, had found out she was pregnant, and her due date was very close to my due date, and struggling with like, why did I lose my baby? And we were going to have a double baby shower together. And, people coming up to us at church, oh, did you hear, so and so's pregnant? And I'm like, I know. Did you hear that I had a miscarriage? Like, it was just awkward and
Yeah.
hurtful. And yeah.
Yeah. And processing those emotions is so difficult, because you want to be happy for the other person and celebrate with them, but at the same time your heart's crushed and you're like, why did my baby have to die, and why is their baby alive? And yeah, going back and forth in your mind and all of that, Very emotional, very, very emotional. Were you able to find out the sex of the baby?
No,
No, never
did
asked
not
that.
find out, didn't ask to see if it was possible to find out. I just kind of let it go and tried to move on and try to ready my body to be pregnant again. And I thought that it was going to take a long, long time to get pregnant again. And so the miscarriage, bleeding, and all of that was finished like the first week of March. And then I had bought a little kit from online so that I could take daily samples to try to figure out when my body was even ovulating, because I didn't know, especially after having such a long time of irregular periods and then trying to figure out my body and figure out when do I even ovulate, what does that look like? And my period went back to being regular, and I had the little ovulation strips, pregnancy strips, and then like a basal thermometer to take your basal temperature, because your temperature is different when you're ovulating, and I was charting all the things, and I was going for daily walks and trying to get myself ready for the future, because I honestly thought that it was going to take forever again to get pregnant. And then it turns out we were able to get pregnant right away, but I didn't feel ready, but I was thankful. And so, like I said, our daughter, Evelyn, and we named her Evelyn Asha, because both names mean life. And she was born January 21st, 2021, or not 2021, 2012. Sorry, I'm getting all my twos and zeros and ones mixed up,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, that's beautiful. And did you have a memorial service for your baby that you miscarried?
we did. My husband's parents live here in Montana, and so they have a creation business where they make big signs and gates and just artwork. And so they made a little sign, and some of my husband's other family members have miscarried and lost babies. And so each baby has a little sign, and hers says Victoria, and it's just the image of Jesus with his arms, kind of up and out. It's like the sign of surrender, when a little kid raises their hands, you come and pick them up. And it's just a little sign. And on their property, they have a little garden, and so that's kind of her memorial. And then later on that year, and I kept going to the Life After Loss group for a while until, I was newly pregnant, because I didn't feel right about going while I was pregnant. But then my due date was October, first week of October. But then my mom unexpectedly passed away the end of September, and her funeral was the beginning of October, so some of that I wrestled with too, because it was like, well, had I still had the baby, would I have been allowed to travel to my mom's funeral? So some of those thoughts set in. And then I learned October was, infant loss, miscarriage month, and so I think it was like October 15th might be the date for that. I can't remember, but we did light a candle for our daughter Victoria that month. And then, we had just had my mom's funeral too. So it was kind of the month of grieving personally, not just my daughter, but also my mom. So yeah. And then I called the Life After Loss group, and I told them the situation because I needed to reach out for help, and they allowed me to come back to the group, even though I was very visibly pregnant, because I didn't want to upset the other ladies there who were still going through, life after loss. And they welcomed me in, and we were able to do a little candlelight service together, all of us that were there for the babies that we had lost, so there were a few different ways we were able to celebrate and remember our baby.
Beautiful. So you were into, your heart told you that you had a girl, even though you weren't able to confirm it. You just, because you named her Victoria.
Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is beautiful, and it's a beautiful name, and yeah, victorious. And she did make an impact, and she's making an impact today. And one guest had shared that it was different. She'll be on twice as well. I want to say it's Rayetta is her first name. She had a miscarriage, and then she lost a child that died in his sleep. at 2 months old, I believe, 8 weeks old, maybe. But she said it was different grieving because when someone's born, you have that time, you have more memories with them versus when you're pregnant carrying a baby and you miscarry, you don't have that many memories. So, to reflect on, versus when the child is born and you create memories, you have those visuals and things like that. Whereas with the miscarriage, you have the emotion in your body. And I thought that was a neat way to perceive that, because we grieve in different ways. And there has to be a grieving process in order for us to heal. And if you never talk about it, it comes out sideways, right? So talking about it and sharing with it and having that support group, so beautiful. I think definitely, if you're listening to this episode and you have experienced miscarriage or, post-abortion loss of a child, look on the internet for a place locally, virtually, where you can go and get that support and go through that grieving process. I have a program that's beautiful that might fit into what you're looking for, divine heart alignment. But if that doesn't work for you, there's other programs out there, and some of them are very strong Christian based. But I just really encourage you to share your story because it brings so much healing. And Charise, with your sharing your story, have you shared your story before about your miscarriage publicly?
I'm not sure publicly, but people I'm close to or other people that God has brought into my life who miscarried. And right after my miscarriage, because it's a small community here, a very small town, some people who knew my husband growing up, I didn't know them, but they heard that we had miscarried, and that mom herself had lost a child. And so she sent me this beautiful big bouquet of flowers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing that I try to do for other people. If I've heard that they've had a miscarriage, I will create them a flower bouquet and deliver it, or I'll order it, if we're not in the same state, because that's what someone did for me. That's how God showed me love, through another lady who's had the same experience. And then just with that, I share openly as much as they're comfortable to hear. And then I don't really pressure them to share with me unless they want to. They feel like that would be healing. But I don't think I've ever shared it. I did do a podcast a long time ago. It was more every time we've had a child, there's been a massive testing or something catastrophic happening, so we have 3 daughters today at the time of this podcast, May 2022, about our 13-year-old Olivia, our 10-year-old Evelyn, and then our youngest daughter is Amila. And our youngest daughter, Amila, was born with congenital heart defects, and so she's gone on to have a few open heart surgeries, and so I've shared little bits of all of my daughter's stories just because that's us. That's who we are. I'm a wife. I'm a mom. Got three daughters. I was wanted a daughter. I got 3. So
Awesome. That's beautiful. A girl mom. Call it the girl mom. Well, thank you so much. What advice would you give someone who's experienced a miscarriage?
well, my advice, and I hope this doesn't sound pushy, but my advice would be just to cry out to God and ask God what He would have you do. That was my comfort and my hope, was going to God. I do not know why I went from not being able to have children to having children. It was such a rough road, losing one along the way. And then, like I said, our youngest daughter, almost losing her to heart transplant, possibility of heart transplant, and near-death experience with that. Sometimes I don't understand the world, but I know that God is good. He's loving. He loves you. He cares about you. He cares about your tears. He cares about your pain. My only advice is just to cry out to God.
Yeah, beautiful advice. Well, thank you so much, Charise, for sharing your story. And for listeners, if this resonates with you, please connect with Charise. You can find a link to connect with her in the description. And if you know someone that this story would resonate with, please share it. Leave a review, and be sure to rate the show as well. And if you're looking for help or support, reach out, connect. I have an amazing program, Divine Heart Alignment, where I work with courageous women post-abortion, loss of a child, or miscarriage, and helping you honor your heart-centered agreements without external validation so that you can be who you are called to be. God has a beautiful plan for you, and your past doesn't define you. What you've been through matters. And to have a safe place where you will be heard and seen is just a comfort and an incredible place to connect with like-minded women for support, for care. So look for that link to the Facebook group, Heart-Centered Alignment, and join and just connect with other women. And just the more you reveal, the more you heal. The more you share your story, the easier it gets and your perspective changes. And it really is a matter of a heart. When we connect our thoughts with our heart, we get a new result, and we can never go back and change our circumstances, but we can get a new perspective and really learn and take the good out of from what has happened so that we can turn around and help others. Remember, it's all a matter of the heart.